The cold was sharp like knives. Snow kept falling from the sky. The wind screamed over the mountains. Inside a remote outpost near the Arctic Circle, everything was quiet. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked with green lights. David Carter leaned over a panel and tightened the last wire. He was alone. The others had left days ago for repairs at the main base. David had stayed behind to fix the signal tower. Was used to silence, the kind that fills your ears and makes you hear your own breath. He liked it that way, less noise, less drama, just work and the sound of machines. That night, the signal dropped again. The main antenna on the hill was frozen. He wrapped himself in a thermal suit and stepped outside. The door hissed shut behind him. Snow blew into his visor. He walked slowly toward the tower. With a toolkit in hand, the wind got stronger. His boots sank deep into the snow. The light from the outpost faded behind him. He reached the tower. The ice had built up again. He began to chip it away. Then his radio made a strange sound, a high sharp tone that did not belong. It made him stop. He removed his glove and adjusted the frequency. The sound came again. It was not a storm. It was not from Earth. It was a voice, very soft. It sounded like someone crying. David stood still. He looked around, but saw nothing. He raised his flashlight and scanned the white field in front of him. At first he saw nothing. Then something moved in the snow, a small shape almost invisible against the white. It was curled up and shaking. He stepped closer and raised the light. It was a girl. Her skin was smooth like glass with a faint glow under it. Her hair was long and silver. Her eyes were closed. She was not dressed for the cold. No shoes, no jacket, only a thin layer of cloth over her shoulders. Was not human. David froze. Every part of him said to run, but he did not move. She looked fragile like a child. Her lips trembled. She opened her eyes slowly. They were bright blue like ice, but deep like the ocean. She looked at him and tried to speak. Her voice was weak. It sounded like wind through broken glass. But she said one word, one name. David stepped back in shock. How did she know his name? Who was she? Where had she come from? The girl tried to sit up. Her arms shook. She fell into the snow again. He could not leave her. Whoever or whatever she was dying. Dropped to his knees beside her. She was freezing. Her skin was cold. He wrapped his coat around her and lifted her in his arms. She was light, almost weightless. He carried her back through the snow. As the wind pushed against him, each step was harder, but he did not stop. The girl clung to his chest. Her breath was slow. Her eyes closed again. Outpost came into view. Its lights were faint through the storm. He reached the door and slammed it shut behind him. Warm air filled the space. He set her down gently on a heated pad. The machines came alive. Scanners blinked. The system ran a medical scan. Screen showed results that made no sense. She had lungs, a heart, a brain, but her DNA was not human, not fully. She had something else inside her, something advanced. David stared at the data, then looked back at her. She was sleeping, but her hand reached out toward him. Her fingers touched his arm, and in that moment he saw something that with his eyes, but in his mind, flashes of stars. A ship in the sky, a room filled with lights, and her inside a cage, her eyes full of fear. And someone outside the cage. It was him, but it was not this moment. It was not this version of himself. He was older, wearing a different suit, and he was shouting something. His voice was full of anger, full of pain, full of promise. Then the vision was gone. He blinked. She opened her eyes again. This time they were not afraid. They were full of hope. He sat down beside her. He did not understand any of this. Not yet, but one thing was clear. This girl had come across the stars. She had come through fire and snow, and somehow, for some reason, she had come to find him. David sat on the floor of the outpost. The heaters buzzed softly. Snow tapped gently against the windows. The girl was asleep on the warming pad. Her breathing had become steady. Her hands no longer shook. But his heart did not slow. He stared at the scanner. Its results kept changing. Blood types that made no sense. Brain waves that pulsed like electrical storms. She was real. She was alive. And she had said his name. He looked at her again. She looked peaceful now, like a child resting after a long night, but her skin still glowed faintly. The light came from inside her, not from any machine. Opened the comms, sent a message to command. No reply. The storm outside had cut the signal again. He was still alone with her. Poured warm water into a cup, lifted it to her lips gently. Her eyes opened as the cup touched her mouth. For a moment she looked confused. Then she drank small, careful sips, tried to speak, tried to ask who she was. But her hand touched his arm again, and the images came back, not random, not broken, clear and bright memories. Not his, but Hirsch saw her running through a dark hallway, Sirens blaring, lights flashing, she held something in her arms. It looked like a crystal. Guards chased her, tall and sharp-faced, not humanch. Turned a corner, saw a door, she ran through it. There was a flash, and then nothing. When the vision ended, he was gasping like he had run 1,000 miles. She looked at him with tired eyes that had seen too much. Asked again, "Who are you? How do you know?" Mesh whispered a name, not hers, his. David. Same voice, the same name as before. He stepped back. How is that possible? They had never met. He had never left Earth. He had never seen her before. Today he opened the logs on his wrist pad, looked up his own record. Born in Texas, studied engineering, worked on signal towers for 5 years. No travel off-world, no military record, no secret projects. But in her memory he had been different. Not an engineer, a leader, a fighter, a protectorand. He had saved her more than once. He looked at her. She looked so fragile. But something about her was older than time. She was not afraid of him. She trusted him. Even though she should not skinned her again. This time he noticed something else, a signal. Not a call, a trace coming from her body. It was weak, almost silent, but it pointed up into the sky. He followed the direction, opened the roof panel, and aimed the telescope. What he saw made his breath stop. High above Earth, floating quietly, was a ship. Dark and massive. Its shape was not natural, not human, not peaceful. It had no lights, but it moved slowly across the stars, like it was waiting. He turned back to her. She was looking at him. She nodded, as if she already knew he had followed her, and now they were here. David stood frozen. He had never trained for this. He was just a technician. He fixed machines, not lives, not worlds. But when she reached out and held his hand, he felt it again. That memory of another version of himself, a man who had stood in fire and had not stepped back. Maybe he was not that man yet, but she believed he could. Besh whispered again, so soft he almost missed it. They will come. They always come, but you can stop them. You did once, you will again. Her eyes closed. She drifted back into sleep. David stood in the silence. Snow still whispered outside, but inside something had changed. Gedu looked down at the girl, an alien, a stranger, a being from beyond the stars. Yet somehow she had trusted no one else, only him. She should not have known his name, but she did, and deep down he was beginning to understand why. The wind outside never stopped. It howled like something alive inside the outpost. Everything was still except for David's. Mindy had not slept. He sat beside the girl for hours, watching her chest rise and fall. Her breathing was steady, but her presence brought too many questions. She had spoken his name. She had shared memories, not random thoughts, but full moments, places he had never seen, feelings he had never felt, and yet they felt familiar. Stood and walked to the scanner, ran her vitals. Again, this time he focused on the brainwaves. Patterns moved across the screen. Not just activity, but structure, like a map. David leaned closer. Inside her mind something was hidden. A second layer encrypted, almost like a locked door. Activated a neural interface, linked the system to the outpost AI. The screen blinked once, then opened a new window. Or memories, not just flashes, but a network. Thousands of moments, connected like stars in a night sky, and right in the center was him. Reached for one note, it opened suddenly. He was not in the outpost anymore. He was standing on metal. A warship bridge. Alarms blared in the distance. Fire burned across the walls behind him. A team of humans shouted commands, weapons charged, shields failing. In front of him the girl stood, but she was not a girl. She was older, stronger, wearing armor. Her eyes filled with fire. She turned to him and called him Commanderthan. The memory ended. David gasped, pulled the headset off. His heart raced, sweat ran down his neck. He looked at her again, still asleep, still peaceful, but inside her mind she held entire lifetime. Mesh picked up the headset again, opened another note. No, he was on a planet, broken buildings, ash in the sky. He walked through a field of ruins. Children cried behind collapsed walls. He helped them up, led them to a shelter in the crowd. He saw her again, younger this time, hiding behind her mother, her face covered in dust. She looked at him with the same eyes, the same fear, the same hopeathy. Memory ended again. He was back in the outpost. Snow tapped the glass, but his mind was somewhere far away. He rubbed his eyes, his fingers trembled. These were not dreams. They were too clear, too strong, and they all shared one truth. In every version he had been there, and he had saved her, but that was impossible. He had only one life, one history. No travel beyond Earth, no command experience, nothing heroic unless these were not versions of him, but echoes, fragments of something older, a life that had happened before or was still happening somewhere else. So looked at her again. She opened her eyes. They met his, and for a moment he knew she had seen what he saw. Did not speak. He did not have Tosh sat up slowly touch the floor with her bare feet, walked toward the screen. With one hand she pointed to the center of the map, the place where his memories sat. Whispered one word. Anchor. Asked what it meant. She looked at him and said, your mind is the anchor you hold. The door. They tried to erase it, but it stayed. He asked who they were. She turned to the window, eyes staring into the sky. Harvesters had heard the name once, a story told by drunk pilots about ships that floated between galaxies, taking resources, taking people, taking entire memories, and leaving only silence. And oh, she was saying it was real and they were coming. He looked back at the map, his hands cold, his chest tight. If what she said was true, then she had not just come to find him, she had come to awaken him, to remind him of who he once was. Or still could. Outside the wind grew louder, but inside a storm of memory had already begun. David stared at the screen, at the name in the center. His name surrounded by timelines he had never lived, and still somehow he remembered all of them. The storm had not stopped for 3 days. Snow covered the outpost like a thick white blanket. The winds pressed against the walls with steady force, but inside the silence was heavier than the storm. David sat at the center of it. The girl now rested near the energy core. Her skin glowed faintly, not weak, but calm. Since the memory map, she had not spoken much, but she no longer looked lost. Now she watched him closely, like she was waiting for him to become something. David checked the sky scan. Again, the object in orbit had moved. It was closer, still silent, still hidden from global networks. But it was there, run at a satellite, not a meteor. It was a ship, and it was not a Lana. Scanner blinked once, then again. A second object, then a third, then 9 more. A slow wave creeping across orbit, covering the Earth from above. He tried to warn the main base, still no signal. The storm outside had jammed everything. He activated the emergency transmitter, used the old frequency buried deep in the network, only used during war. Protocol sent one word, watch. Girl stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen, her voice quiet. They found me. They never stopped. David turned to her, his hands clenched. He asked why they wanted her. She paused, then looked down at her hands. He escaped with something they lost, something they need, but something I gave to Yao. Stared confused. She stepped closer, her hand pressed to his chest. You are the carrier now. You are the key. Before he could ask more, the lights blinked once, twice, then all at once. Darkness. The outpost went silent. The hum of machines died. The heaters shut down. The screens turned black. David grabbed a flashlight, checked the backup core. Still functioning, but cut off. Storm was still roaring outside. But this was not natural. This was interference. Ran to the emergency panel, switched to internal power. Lights came back, weak but working. Girl stood still, her eyes closed. She whispered something in her language, a soft chant, almost like a song. Then David heard it, a hum, not inside the outpost, but above it, a low vibration, not thunder, not wind. A shadow passed over the roof, too big for a drone, too silent for a plane. He stepped to the window and saw a ship, black and smooth, floating just above the mountain. Its lights blinked like eyes watching, measuring, waiting. Stepped back, heart racing. The girl turned to him. They know you are awake. You opened the gate. Now they begin. David grabbed his gear, loaded the emergency pack, activated the shield. Cody had no plan, only instinct. He would not wait to be hunted. It turned to her, said they had to leave. She nodded, no fear in her face, only sadness. Asked if she had done this before. She looked away. Too many times. They moved fast out the back hatch into the storm. Snow hit their suits like glass, but they kept going. David guided her through the ice toward the old research tunnels built years ago, abandoned after the quakes, but still marked in his memory. Behind them the hum returned, now louder, now closer. Stopped, turned from the white fog. Something stepped forward, not human, tall and thin, its body covered in metal, its arms long and sharp. No eyes, no mouth, only movement. It raised one arm, pointed at them. David did not wait. He ran. They reached the tunnel gate, broke the frozen lock, slid inside. If darkness welcomed them, but the hum did not stop. It followed. It closed the gate behind them, sealed it with ice. They moved through the tunnels. Old lights flickered, walls cracked, pipes broken, but they were safe for now. They stopped in an old chamber. David collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Girl sat beside him, silent, watching him. He looked at her, asked what came next. She reached into her sleeve, pulled out a small crystal. It pulsed with a soft light. Then she handed it to him. This holds the first code, the one that can stop the signal. Only you can unlock it, because you already have once. Long ago. David looked at the crystal. It felt warm, familiar, like it had waited for his hand. Did not understand all of it, But one thing was clear: Earth was no longer safe. The sky was no longer empty, and he, a simple man in a frozen outpost, had just become the only hope left. The tunnels were cold and silent. Dust floated in the air like frozen time. Old metal doors stood half open. Rusted signs pointed to places that no longer mattered. David sat near a broken control panel. The crystal still rested in his hand, its glow pulsed with soft light like a heartbeat. His heartbeat. The girl sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes focused only on him. She had said the code was inside the crystal, but the key to unlock it was inside him. Turned the crystal slowly. Nothing happened. It looked simple: no buttons, no symbols, just smooth glass and soft light. Placed it on the scanner. The machine blinked once, then stopped. The girl shook her head. Machines cannot read it, only you can. Asked how. She said nothing. Instead, she touched her fingers to his forehead. A shock passed through him. Not pain, something else, warm, heavy, full of motion. The world around him shifted. Was standing in a white room, clean walls, bright lights, people in uniforms, not Earth uniforms. In front of him stood another version of himself, same face, but older, stronger, wearing a black coat with silver lines. That man held the same crystal. He was speaking to a group of people. He was telling them the code was not a tool. It was a message, not for machines, but for Memorius. Then he looked at David, not just a memory, but directly at him. You were never meant to forget. You chose to hide it. But now it is time. Through David gasped back in the tunnel, sweat on his face. The crystal now floated just above his hand, spinning slowly, its light brighter than before. He stood. The air around him felt charged. The crystal responded to his breath. His thoughts closed. His eyes. Images flashed again, but now they were different. Not just hers, his own memories now stirred. Memories he had buried, memories he had not known were real. A world on fire, a voice crying in the dark. His own hand reaching into the void, pulling the girl from a collapsing chamber, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, but not the first time. It had happened somewhere, someone. He opened his eyes. The crystal stopped spinning. It dropped into his hand, now glowing with two colors, one from her, one from him. Asked what it meant. The girl stepped closer, her voice low and steady. You have begun to remember. That is how it begins. The code is not just data. It is who you were and who you can become again. David felt something shift inside him. His body tingled, his skin warmed, his hands no longer felt numb from the cold. Stood without effort. His joints felt lighter, his mind clearer. Looked at the broken tunnel system around them. He reached for a control panel, touched the screen. It powered on. No cables, no fuel, just touch. Girl smiled. You are waking. Suddenly, the tunnel lights blinked red. Motion sensors detected movement. Something was coming. David grabbed his gear, held the crystal close. Its light faded again. Now hidden, led her through the old tunnel paths up toward the surface. They moved fast, but behind them the sound followed. Net footsteps, not machines. A sound like air being pulled through a hollow bone, dry, sharp. Wrong. They reached the outer gate. David stopped. A shadow stood at the far end of the tunnel, tall, thin head tilted sideways. Its body pulsed with light. Not friendly, not curious. It began to move. David turned, opened the gate. They ran into the night. The storm was weaker now. The stars were visible again. But in the sky, one star, Maved, not shining, not still. It opened slowly like an eye. David stared at it, felt the crystal heat in his hand. The girl whispered, "They see you now." David looked at her, then at the crystal, then at the star. She did not know everything yet, but he knew things had changed, and this time he would not run. The mountain air was thin. Snow covered the ground in silver. But David no longer felt the cold. He stood on a high ridge. The wind moved through his hair. His breath calm, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The girl stood behind him, wrapped in a blanket, silent, watching. Below them, the harvester ships hovered above the earth. Dark, still waiting. They had not attacked, not yet, but their presence changed everything. Cities below had gone quiet. Satellites failed one by one. Power grids blinked and vanished like dying stars. But the outpost remained untouched. Because of him, David could feel it now. In the crystal, in his blood, something ancient, something hidden, sat near a frozen stone. Held the crystal in his hands. Its glow was steady, not like before. Now it pulsed with rhythm, with purpose. The girl stepped closer. Her voice was calm. The code inside you is waking, but it needs focus. If your mind breaks, it will scatter, and the chance will be lost. Nodded, closed his eyes. Darkness filled his mind. Then light waves of color, sound without voice, memory without time. Was not David. Not only David was someone else, someone who had lived long before this place. A warrior, a builder, a protector. Had faced the harvesters once, and he had won. But The cost had been high to high. Had erased himself, locked the knowledge away, buried the weapon inside a cycle of lives, waiting for the one moment, the right moment, to return. Oh, that moment had come. David opened his eyes. The crystal had changed. Its shape had unfolded like a flower, revealing a small core floating above it, a soft pulse of light. Alive, aware, the girl stepped back, her eyes wide. They unlocked the source. No one has done that in thousands of years. David stood. The pulse followed him. It moved with his breath, listened to his thoughts, looked at the sky, reached his hand forward, and the clouds parted. The air shimmered. A pulse of energy moved across the ground, and in the distance, one of the harvester ships tilted slightly. Its lights blinked, its engines paused. David felt it, not victory, but connection. They had noticed him. They were not watching anymore, they were listening. Turned to the girl. Her face was calm, but there was sadness in her eyes. You are changing, and soon you will not need. Mel walked to her, held her hand. That is not true. You brought me here. You held the memory when I could not. You reminded me of what I waste. Ground beneath them shook slightly, a soft tremor, then another. The sky lit with a red glow. One of the larger ships opened its panels. A signal beam shot toward the earth, but it curved away, blocked by something unseen. David raised the crystal, and the beam shattered in the sky like glass in slow-mo. The girl looked up, her eyes full of wonder. You are becoming the key, and the world is waking with Yao. Could feel it now. The pulse of the earth, the hidden signals rising from deep places, old machines buried long ago, waking, calling back. But there was something else, something pulling at him. Pain fell to one knee. The pulse flickered, the light bent. The girl rushed forward, her hands on his shoulders, her voice shaking. You open too fast. Your body cannot carry the source. Not. Alana looked at her, eyes wide, breath short, held his face, tears in her eyes. Then she touched the crystal, and her body glowed. No, David whispered, but it was still a teeth. Light passed from her into him, slow and warm, then sharp and bright. His skin burned with fire. His chest felt like it would break, but he did not let go. He held the light, he held the pain. When the glow faded, he was different. His eyes had changed, his voice was deeper. His hands no longer shook. Turned to her. She had collapsed in the snow, breathing soft, almost fattened. Lifted her gently, held her close. I told you, you are not. Alana stood with her in his arms, looked at the sky. The ships above moved again, now faster, now afraid. They knew what he had become in. They were coming, but now he was ready. The sky was no longer quiet above the mountains. The harvester fleet had fully awakened. Ships moved like shadows across the clouds. Beams of light scanned the ground, looking, searching, not for armies, but for one. Mandavita stood at the edge of the old world. The girl rested in his arms, her body still, her light fading. She had given him everything. Not just her strength, not just her memory, but the last part of her soul. And now, the source inside him was Compulta. His eyes glowed with the same light. His breath hummed with hidden energy. Every heartbeat sent waves through the earth, and the machines that had once feared silence now listened only to him. He carried her to the center of the ancient tower, the one buried long ago, built by a resistance that time had forgotten. Stone and metal surrounded him, cold but alive. Moment he stepped inside, the tower lit up. Lines of blue traced the walls. The air grew warmer. The machines began to hum again. They had been waiting for him. Placed her gently on a platform. A field of light wrapped around her, soft and golden. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes opened slightly. She looked up at him and smiled. You brought me home. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it reached him like thunder. Stepped back, lifted the crystal above his head, and the tower responded. A pulse shot into the sky. It rose faster than light, struck the clouds, and reached the waiting ships. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the ships shifted one by one. Their lights blinked, their engines stopped, their panels closed. A sound followed, not loud, not sharp, but deep, like the sigh of a Jonthi had heard the signal, and they knew what it meant. Source had returned, and they could not fight. Itone's ship cracked in half, then another lost its shape like smoke, dissolving in the wind. David stepped outside the tower. The earth shook beneath him, but he did not fall. Raised his hands, and the sky answered. Lightning danced between clouds, not wild, but controlled. Each strike hit a target. Each light a message. This world is protected. The last ship began to rise. It turned away, its shape shifting like it was trying to disappear. David closed his eyes, spoke a word, one single word, and the ship vanished, gone without sound, gone without memory. Silence returned, but this time it felt peaceful. Walked back inside. The light around the girl still held, but it had dimmed. He sat beside her, held her hand. She looked at him again, eyes soft, tired. Is it over? He nodded. Yes, they will not come again. She smiled, then closed her eyes, and for the first time she slept without fear. David stayed beside her. The tower faded into silence, but the crystal inside his chest still pulsed, not with danger, but with memory. He knew this was not the end, but a beginning. World would change, stories would rise, people would ask, who had stopped the sky from falling? And someday, they would remember her, the girl who crossed galaxies to find the man who once saved her, and who did again it with armies, not with weapons, but with a choice. Seto, remember to protect, to become.